Cool. Thanks very much, Erin. That's very interesting. Maybe if you can close your presentation, then we can each see each other again, or we can just put the screen so that we can see everybody. And I would take questions from the floor, if there are. And if people need a little bit of time to think, I would already have a few. Tan is there. If there are any more, I would bundle questions because we are quite a large group today. So if there are a few more hands at the moment, I would probably take two or three questions at a time. Tan and Tina, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's really interesting. I mean, just indeed very much overview. I'm not very much in gender, but I found the fighting, or let's say general fighting on women, let's say adopt innovation is less than men is very interesting. And I wanted to ask the two thing related. Is this also what do you think about the relation of innovation with, like biological difference between men and women? Like women are maybe more multitasking, men not, and with the I don't know, curiosity, I don't know. That could be also the reason or not. And the second question I would like to ask is, what do you think, or what is the news on the time of the difference in the past and now? Is this woman getting more flexible for adopting compared with the past? Maybe still less than men, but maybe getting more compared with the past. Or is still the same in the last 100, 200 years? Thank you.
Okay, so those were already two questions, basically by Tan. Maybe you want to answer both of these questions and then we take Tina.
Sure, thank you. That's
Yeah.
easier on my memory too. Yeah, good questions. Thanks. On the biological considerations of men and women, I mean, yeah, you can see this sort of woven, of course, through the cultural context as well. I mean, women have heavy responsibility around childcare, things that women aren't going to be able to biologically separate from. And that definitely affects their amount of free time that they have, especially if you don't have people who are helping with childcare. Um, yeah, and I guess I should say, like, yeah, it's not biologically necessitated that women take care of children, but because we women give birth to children, this ends up being culturally significant, I suppose. One of the things that we think about a lot is women and mechanization, which again is not biological, but it's a cultural issue, and sometimes like lifting heavy things can be a biological issue, perhaps. I think 100% the driving force for women not being able to adopt as easily as men are social factors that I laid out on that slide. But an example of, women not being able to carry heavy things and that affecting innovation adoption is women have a traditional storage method of sweet potato, which we have seen in Western Africa. And that is basically digging a hole and putting your sweet potatoes into the ground in order to preserve them. Well, then an innovation came along where we were going to keep the sweet potatoes above ground in these built sheds, but the equipment was too difficult for the women to carry. They weren't able to sort of construct the shed as was suggested by the innovators. And because of that, because the men had to come in and build that storage, the more sophisticated storage, they lost control over the sweet potatoes themselves and that income. So you can kind of see this like one example of a biological difference, perhaps. But 100%, I think that social factors play a more significant role than biological factors. And then in terms of over time, I really don't know. I don't know if it's getting better or worse. My guess is that it's probably remaining the same, and because really we've only just started to even look at it, I think, and understand the differences of adoption between men and women, over the long haul. It's probably in the past 50 years we've started to pay attention to these types of differences. But I really welcome others on the call to jump in, if you have other examples or if you want to contribute your opinion to answering this question.
Thanks. So others can think of something to add to that discussion while Tina comes forward with her questions or comments or additions.
Okay, thanks. No, it's actually a question, a scaling question. How much? No, let me start like that. I discussed with a colleague around international agricultural research and our observation that they were more active on gender research in the past few years, and that it's currently decreasing also due to funding, etc. So how far did you manage to institutionalize your GenderUp innovation into agricultural research institutes, like scaling within the institutions? You mentioned something on your last slide, but it was very open. Could you dwell a little bit on it, where you could see change and so on? That would be great.
Sure. So, I mean, I can give an example. So, I think we need to be definitely thinking about mainstreaming gender and social differences on an institutional scale. I have seen people, make attempts in this direction. Like the CGAR is putting it together a whole new scaling process. And there's efforts, there's voices in that process who want to make sure that gender and social differentiation is like mainlined through that scaling process. But it has yet to happen. I mean, I see a lot. I am continuously confused on how we can have gender as top line goal for SDGs, USAID, CGIAR, GIZ. I mean, it doesn't matter what organization you're talking about. Gender is at the top for a goal. But we continuously fail to really make it a part of what we're thinking about when we make all these innovations and do all these research. But so for the program that I run, the Horticulture Innovation Lab, the way we've mainstreamed gender into our research is that when we developed our portfolio, each of the regions looked at a list of priorities that was put together through a long, involved process that involved stakeholders, workshops, etc. They took these long listed priorities and challenges in which we could fund research to try to solve. And they came up with a community profile that they really wanted to ensure that this research benefited. So each region came up with this community archetype, and each region, it was a woman, a small scale farmer, and then from there it kind of changed. I mean, we didn't have this was hands off on our part, but they really developed it. It could have, like in Nepal, it was a migrant family. In Ghana, it was a woman who was a part of a multi-wife household. And so the point was that then we used that as the center point to prioritize from this list of challenges that the scientists had come up with. So sort of from the very beginning, we were able to center our research around an outcome of making this woman's life better. So what were the research questions that we could ask and achieve that would make this person's life, it would be relevant to this person's life? And what we figured from that process is that because these are marginalized intersectional groups sort of at the margins, along the way, if we can benefit that group of people, most likely we are affecting other members of the community as well. So, and that's very different than how we have done our research portfolio management in the past. In the past, we ask scientists, what is the most important horticulture question out there that we need to answer? And then we go about it from a very biophysical lens. This time it was very socially led, with a very specific intention of who we wanted to benefit. And then, of course, GenderUp, is a tool that helps us achieve some of those gender goals. But that's how we centered our gender and mainstream gender in our work.
Cool. Thanks a lot. Yeah, interesting approach, actually. I think one can use it for more research questions we start designing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I've been thinking about how we brought gender into the projects also, which was also, I mean, quite a useful way, isn't it, to start to discuss about the issues. And I think that's what the GenderUp maybe structures a bit more, even to make sure that everybody thinks about these different issues and constraints and possibilities to solve them. I think that's useful. Just for my own curiosity, whom in this group has actually been trained on the GenderUp? I know it about Dokas, Tina, and Peter. Is there anybody else in the group who's benefited from that? Okay. So maybe others would be interested. Maybe Erin, if you run another course after the one that is full already, then you may have a few takers from this group. And I'm also interested, because we have a number of the PhD students of the different projects with us here today. And I would be quite interested to hear from you also whether you can contribute something to what Erin has presented on your own experiences. I wonder, Eunice Sapong, I noticed that you dropped out in between, but maybe you were here for most of the presentation. Is there anything from your own research that you feel rings a bell with what Erin was saying on gender issues? Not sure whether your internet connection is stable enough. Eunice, probably connection is not good. Cecile, obviously with your work you have focused on gender, so I'm sure that you can say a lot about it. Stephanie, what about your research? Because Stephanie is working on remote sensing issues and also geo tools with women.
Do you mind repeating your question? Sorry, I've been
Well, I
distracted
was just wondering whether in your work you came up some of these gender-related issues that Erin was talking about, because you're dealing with the geo tools, and I've seen some
Yes.
very nice photos of women, using maps and all these things. So I
Yes,
was wondering
yes.
whether you can relate to some of what Erin
Yes.
was saying.
And actually, Dorcas gave us good hints, and others in this collaboration also gave us good hints, because we're not particularly specialized in gender-related issues, but we have to address them if we want to reach people. So yes, a central aspect that relates to this essential, let's say, problem of delivering an approach that reaches someone but reaches people differently and gender groups differently. That is something that we experienced in a workshop in Ghana last year, where we separated men and women for a mapping workshop where people learned how to map their fields with an app, and where we had quite different outcomes for men and women, which then hopefully helps us address these differences. So let's say the core would then be providing an app, but then the additional the additional support should be in seeing where maybe people need different additional learning materials, for example, to be able to leverage that. So we saw quite a difference, for example, in terms of literacy, but also in terms of digital literacy. So this is what we would like to address then in designing learning materials on how to use these apps in the future.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think what's key is just to think about it. If we can just have people thinking about it, you might not have all the answers. You might not even necessarily have the right expertise on on the team, but just as you did, like reaching out to people who you know might have something to say is a critical step. And that's kind of what GenderUp really prompts you to do in a systematic way. You don't necessarily have all the answers or all the data on at your fingertips, but it just allows you to go through a process of thinking about it. And so were you able to, like, have you been able to make any concrete decisions or actions based on thinking about it a bit? Like, how have things changed?
Hints that we got from the participants themselves where it was a little bit like the reasoning and the why they needed the same tool or what they needed the same tool for. And that was a little bit different for the two groups. So yeah, if we want to target the respective groups properly, I believe it makes a lot of sense to make the link to what they said very present so that they see, okay, this is something that can help me because it addresses something that I communicated as an issue, as a problem. So yeah.
Good work.
I think an important point Stephanie raised was also the digital literacy that is different between men and women. It's not only in developing countries, it's also in our communities often so that the men are more tech affine and like to twiddle around with something, whereas the women say, oh, you know, husband, you do it for me. Something like that. So yeah, I think those are issues to just keep in the backs of your mind when innovations are being developed.
Well, and right before we get to Tina, on top of that, it's also sometimes who owns the phone or who has access to whoever is going, like that, what the app is going to be on is another important thing to think about. It's usually the male head of household. If there's
and it's quite interesting for our teams because, you know, several of the projects are about to develop apps for farmers, for farmers in general, but then to realize that maybe the female and the male farmers need different gadgets or different approaches. This is quite important. Tan is smiling. All right, Tina, your question, please, or your hand.
Yeah, a bit following up the discussion and wondering how we can break biases amongst, let's say, more natural-oriented scientists. And I would say many are now gender aware of these problems. So we could run the GenderUp method to even go into all this nitty-gritty details and intersectionality. But then I still see the question about implementation, how to move from even the additional innovations we identify that are needed. If we have the luxury, I mean, CG has more luxury to run additional innovations. In our German run research projects, it's even more difficult. How to actually go this one step further. And if you have any ideas or examples, because often then I know money is lacking and then they refer back to the easiest way, working again to the closer farmers, closer male farmers, and so on. So how did you, or have you got any ideas how to overcome? I still think it's a bias. Sometimes we could be more creative, but then the gender experts are not constantly on the field and can like say, why don't you do it like this and that? And have you suggested how to overcome this implementation gaps in addition to the training?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really important question. And that is what this paper that just came out in Sustainable Ag, Breaking Biases and Building Momentum tries to get at. I think that it's just going to take constant constant drumbeat, really. I mean, the way that I frame it at this point is if you want to be good at your job, you're going to consider gender and social differences. So if you are trying to achieve sustainable development goals or wherever organization you're in, if you are trying to achieve those goals, which I'm sure include gender, then you're not going to be good at your job without considering it. So that is just the argument that I have made. Yeah, but certainly, like, how many people am I talking to? It's like a whole system that we need to change. I think doing GenderUp or considering gender, the earlier you can in the project, the better. Because once you reach really the point of having an innovation, all kinds of decisions have been made already that will exclude women and other marginalized populations from benefiting from your innovation. So the earlier you can get sort of those considerations into a project when you're still deciding where resources go. I mean, yeah, the once you reach the scaling stage and you've already allocated all the resources, then it's going to be no one's going to want to give anything up in order to actually consider gender. So yeah, doing it as early as you can. I do think like the training on GenderUp somehow, or any sort of training on gender at the beginning for biophysical scientists and really making it a requirement is important. Because just one last point on that, it's the decisions we make along the way consistently that make a difference ultimately in the outcome and how effective you are with your innovation and scaling it and benefiting women and others. So you can't just have a gender expert, as you say, come in. It needs to be sort of in the back of people's minds pretty consistently, I think, or like at the forefront, you know. But
I think,
welcome others.
yeah. Sorry, I was just going to chip in here. I think the system needs to be so that gender approaches need to be evaluated as part of the successes of projects. And if that is known to the proponents and to the implementers of projects, I think then it will be much more at the forefront. But I can tell you an example. From time to time, I'm reviewing project proposals also for EU and others. And oftentimes the question that the evaluator is asked is gender considered, yes or no? And that's not a question that should be answered, but the question is to what extent is it, or in which regard is it, or whatever, much more quantitatively. But just saying yes, no doesn't really help anybody, because anybody can add a sentence on, yes, we will be gender sensitive in our work, and that's it. So I think once this is much more part of the entire, as you said, Erin, the entire system, I think then it will be easier also to get started with gender relevant activities. Azrat, thank you for being patient. Turn is yours.
Thank you. It took me a long time to find out where the yellow hand was. I'm sorry.
Okay. You can raise your physical hand as well.
Yes, thank you, Hannah. And thank you, Erin, for that presentation. I really enjoyed it. If I could just ask one very short question and add a comment. My question is on the GenderUp method itself. Your website, you mentioned it, your website also mentions it. You say it's a conversational method for responsible scaling. And I was just wondering, who is conversing here? If you could answer that.
Yeah, it's the innovation team. So
Okay.
the GenderUp method is engaging an innovation team. Usually it's like 6, 7, 8 people, a team of people who have been working on innovation for a while and are about to scale it or in the process of scaling it.
Okay, thank you. And a comment. I mean, I've been doing research on gender in agriculture in Ethiopia. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the agricultural system in Ethiopia. And my feeling is most of this innovations and gender interventions in the agricultural field sort of target women as if they were autonomous, independent entities. But men and women don't exist like that. They exist as parts of, family units, as women exist as daughters, as wives, as mothers, and so on. And there is a lot of interdependence. When, for example, I asked why is it that women in pretty much of northern Ethiopia don't actually till the land using the ox plow, I was told, why should they? I mean, what would the men do then? But because they are not, they don't till the land, they are far removed from agriculture. They are cast in the roles of supporters and helpers rather than actual farmers. And this, for me, is a result of the way women are cast in this interdependent relationship. So in that sense, I feel that as long as we are targeting women as if they live all by their own and don't actually target families and communities as a whole, these sort of interventions will not be effective.
Yeah, I could not agree more with you. I fell into this gender work sort of backwards, but the more I get into it and the deeper I feel like I'm involved and I learn, it is fascinating to me that we focus on just women when we're trying to empower women. They're part of a whole social construct that everyone's opinion kind of needs to change in order for there to be more room for women to, have different activities on the farm. And having different activities means you control different incomes. And once you control different, more income, then you have more household decision-making power. But 100%, if they do everything right, they're not going to be successful in like if you're operating in a vacuum, like nothing's really changing because they can do everything right and you're not going to actually see a change if you're not seeing a change within the community or in the household dynamics. I don't know if that's the kind of, I mean, that's what I think about a lot given your example, but your example brings up a lot of points that we work with often in the gender community around household decision making, women being considered farmers or not, et cetera.
I think it comes back to this the notion that gender is not just about men and women, but that it is about different groups within a community. And I think that is often also forgotten. I think that it's much more complex than just a two-way dimension. You have the older people, you have the older men that may also be disadvantaged because they cannot carry heavy loads, etc., etc. You may have disabled but young people, or all these different groups. And one little anecdote also I would like to share, just as you were mentioning that you shouldn't forget, both of you were saying men and women are interacting. Long time ago, when I started working in the CG system in Uganda, there was the notion to help women with their agroforestry activities. So they founded the whatever women's agroforestry group. And the result was that actually the women were marginalized because the men were envious that the women get all the attention of the researchers or extension office or whatever. But then the men came up and they negotiated with the women and they founded the Two Wings Agroforestry Group, saying clearly, the bird needs two wings to fly. We need the men and the women to do these activities. And that actually made the breakthrough in the sustainability of the activities. But I really like that. That's like 30, 40 years ago. And it really shows also that there is negotiation power between groups, and that working together in the end was actually the better way than just focusing only on the one group.
Yeah, well, and I think you both bring up a point that if you don't work on the underlying system of the dynamic within the community, and certainly intersectionality is a huge part of that, you're going to have a very difficult time sustainably making a change. Like, particularly for horticulture, for fruits and vegetables, very often those crops are considered women's crops and women make money from those crops. But if women make a lot of money, then men will take over those crops and start making the money. So the underlying root issue hasn't changed. So that's really, we're treating a lot of symptoms of a root issue. Yeah.
I think it's a systemic issue. Tan needs to leave. Thanks for being here. And let me just check whether there are any more issues that we want to discuss right now. Otherwise, I'm sure that we can all get in touch with you, Erin. We can share your email contacts, and thanks everybody for being here.
Yeah, thanks for all of your good work, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for the discussion. A really lively discussion again. I really enjoy that that the discussion goes round and has different aspects here. Erin, that was a lot of interest today. Thank you very much again.